God helps those who help themselves. And then last Sunday we did. I'm asking y'all, I forgot. God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And we changed that around and turned it into a more biblical approach, which was God will be with you to help you handle anything that comes along in life, which is a much more biblical. So we're going to move on this Sunday. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. You ever seen that on a bumper sticker? That, my dear friends, is bumper sticker theology. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I've seen that a lot in my day. And I've been around a few days, almost as much as Jim there. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. How many of it, if I were to walk to the parking lot right now, how many of us would I find any of those bumper stickers on your bumper? All right, I see I told Lynn that, and so we're done. What was that, Susie? That settles it. What do you think about God said it, I believe it, that settles it? How come we don't have that on our cars? Or maybe we're too cheap to go buy one. I don't know, but, well, Georgia Bell's right. There's a lot wrong with that statement. It's way too simplistic. And it brings into the focus of how do you read the Bible? That's what it really brings into focus. How many of us know how to read the Bible? Not a soul. See, that helps explain why there's no bumper stickers out there. I get it. How many of us know how to read the Bible? It's an interesting question. Or put another way, how do you read the Bible? How do you read the Bible? How do you study the Bible? How do you find what's in this book that would bring God's truth and God's love to us? How do you do that exactly? Well, let's see. Let's see. Here it is, chapter 1, Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. What's that tell us? That's Genesis 1 and 2. Right away there's questions, isn't it? Right away there's questions. And judging by how many words I see on these pages, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get all this. Who thinks they've got all this down pat? Anybody? See, now they're telling the truth. Nobody can raise a hand to that. Not even Don Crook gets to raise his hand to that. Right, Don? Well, let me ask you another question. Same question, just in a different way. When you read the Bible, or you hear it, do you ever interpret what's said or that you read? Or do you take it word by word for word by word? You interpret it. And that's the truth. Because each and every one of us, whether we admit it or not, interprets what we read. There is no such thing as a wooden, literal reading of the Bible. You just can't do it. First of all, it would require that you be fluent in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Koine Greek. Because this Bible, and every one of those Bibles in those pews, and every Bible that you have at your homes and my home, unless it's in the original languages, you're interpreting it. Because someone already interpreted it for you. Right? How many of you are licensed to sell insurance in here? I know one. Oh, yeah, two. Oh, yeah. I'm about to forget about him, Wayne. He may not be licensed. All right. Okay, he may not be licensed. That's right. But he wears nice ties, so we'll give him a pass. So if I need insurance, am I going to go to Don Crook? And if you read the Bible, and if I read the Bible, we have no choice but to go to the scholars of the original languages and read their interpretation of the ancient manuscripts. Now we're in trouble. Do we have the exact copies of the letters that, for example, Paul wrote in the New Testament? Don't exist. They don't exist. What we call the Old Testament comes down to us from the Greek, ancient Greek, that was translated from ancient Hebrew and Aramaic into a document called the Septuagint. And from there, it was been translated into English. Worse, we don't even have the original copies of the Septuagint. Worse, the Septuagint is not based on the most ancient manuscripts of the day. See, I thought we'd get all puffed up today. Say, hey, I can read that Bible. No, you can't. Not without interpreting it. Let me show you just how much we interpret Scripture. We're going to see a lot of Scripture today. We're doing things a little differently. And we're going to start out in the first part of the Old Testament, well, several books in. I think you'll be amazed and maybe even a little upset at what you're about to see. Because I suspect that most of us have never ever seen these verses, and in fact, you're probably going to say, you made those up, Scott. But I didn't. So let's drop in on Brother Moses. You ever hear that guy, Moses? Anybody ever watch the Ten Commandments, the original one by Cecil D. DeMille? That guy, Yul Brynner played the Pharaoh. He's got all these plagues coming down on him. we're ruining his party. He's all upset. And he asks his chief guy, what is this guy's name? And the guy goes, his name is Moses. You ever saw that movie? Great movie. So we're going to drop in after the people have left Egypt, and now they're gathered at the base of Mount Sinai. And they were there a long, long time. Remember a few Sundays ago we had Mount Sinai on the screen? Here we go. Are you holding on to your seats? You're going to need them. Here we go. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you put on a garment made of two different materials. Now, if God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. Who among us is wearing a cotton poly blend? Anybody? It gets worse. This is easy. Shall not sow your field with two different kinds of seed. You shall not put on a garment made of two different materials. Why do you think that was? Why was that important to the Israelites in the desert? Because they didn't have permanent press cycle back then. Come on, y'all Bible scholars. Shall we move on? The pig, for even though it has divided hoofs and is cleft-footed, what's that mean, cleft-footed? Let's see if there's any farmers here. There's one, there's a couple. Their toenails spread, see? For even though it has divided hoofs and is cleft-footed, it does not chew the cud. That's unclean for you. Of their flesh you shall not eat. They are unclean for you. Sorry, I might have left out one. Pigs are unclean for you. Well, there goes bacon. There goes spare ribs. And you know that good ham salad that Ralph sells at Butcher Block? Why, that is nothing but pure temptation. That's just pure temptation to draw us away from the true way. Poor old pigs. They're unclean. You ready for some more? Oh, this is good. Everything in the waters that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the streams, such you may eat. But anything in the seas or the streams, now here they were in the middle of the Sinai desert. But anything in the seas that does not have fins or scales of the swarming creatures in the waters, and among all the other creatures that are living in the waters, they are detestable to you, and detestable they shall remain. How many of you ever had shrimp? Y'all going to hell. God said it. I believe it. That settles it. Let's get a little more serious. Whoever strikes father or mother shall be put to death. That's serious. That's pretty serious. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son, that ever happened to anybody? Who will not obey his father and mother, who does not heed them when they discipline him, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of his town at the gate of that place. They shall say to the elders, this son of yours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. How many mama and daddies do you think actually turned their sons in? So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear and be afraid. God said it. I believe it. Does that settle anything? Mm-mm. "6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a holy Sabbath of solemn rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire in all your dwellings on the Sabbath day." How many of us ever went out and ate after Sunday church? How many of you ever had to clean the house real quick on a Sunday? Or mow your yard on a Sunday? There it is. Y'all going to hell. Are we done yet? Now this is the kicker. Now everybody stay calm. This is actually in the book of Deuteronomy. "You shall have a designated area outside the camp to which you shall go. With your utensils you shall have a trowel. When you relieve yourself outside, you shall dig a hole with it and then cover up your excrement. Because the Lord your God travels along with your camp to save you and to hand over your enemies to you, therefore your camp must be holy, so that he may not see anything indecent among you and turn away from you." How many of us have indoor plumbing? Now we all going to hell. Believe it or not, in the 1800s, there were actually sermons preached from this text about the evil of having indoor bathrooms. And it especially became acute when church people actually wanted to put restrooms inside churches. Now, when I started out in the ministry, I had 2 little churches. I had 3, and 2 out of the 3 had outdoor johns. Deuteronomy 23, 12 through 14. We got 4 bathrooms in this church. It's just a little bitty church. What's going on here? God said it. I believe it. Now, about this time you're going to say, well, you know what? Jesus changed all of that. That's Old Testament stuff. I don't have to fall under that anymore. Watch this. These are the words of Jesus. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Words of Jesus. Matthew 5, that's part of the Sermon on the Mount. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus just said, not one stroke's going to pass away. So Jesus is interpreting Scripture. He's interpreting the Old Testament. But what's he saying? What's he really saying? Who's he talking to? Who's his example? The scribes and the Pharisees. Unless your what? Righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. So is Jesus really saying that we have to keep every little jot and tittle of the law? What he's saying is that the law was given so that we may live lives of righteousness, not that we're caught up in every little thing that we may do right or wrong. Because it is real important to Jesus that we lead lives of righteousness. And Christ makes it clear time and time again that if you don't lead a life of righteousness, you're not going to end up in the kingdom of heaven. And he's looking at these scribes and Pharisees who kept every little bit of the law, or they said they did, and then they threw it up against other people who couldn't possibly even know about the law and told them the same thing that I was telling you. Because you couldn't keep all that, we're going to hell. Tricky stuff. Because Moses' law was divided into how many divisions? To what did the law speak to? Well, certainly it spoke to ritual, religious ritual. What else did it speak to? Moral laws, like the Ten Commandments and others. And then lastly, remember the part about going out into the desert? How do we live with ourselves? How do we live together as a group? So there were civil, moral, and religious. That was what the law was meant to do, not to trap people, but to help guide people into righteous living. So, how many of you now think that no matter what it is, you're interpreting the Bible? Of course you are. Of course I am. What do you think about God said it, I believe it, that settles it? A lot more to it than that, isn't there? It's way too simplistic. Let's talk a moment about slavery. Do you realize that there's 200 and some passages, depending upon the translation, about slavery in the whole of the Bible? Some of those are talking about when the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. But it extends even into the New Testament. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. I've heard people say that slavery in the Old Testament was a different kind of slavery. Well, it's okay as long as they don't die. What good is that? That's no good. What you going to do with this verse? God said it. I believe it. That settles it. You say, well, that's Old Testament again. Oh, yeah. What's this? This is from Luke 12. Luke, the gospel that takes in the marginalized. The gospel that talks about those low-down shepherds coming to see Jesus' birth. That slave who knew what his master wanted but did not prepare himself or do what was wanted will receive a severe beating. Hamilton points out in his book that this verse was used as a reason for keeping slavery around in America. What you going to do with this verse? You can read that verse all day long. But that completely ignores who knows how many verses in the Bible about justice and mercy and freedom and grace. In 1844, our church split over this verse. And it wasn't until 1939 that we got over that and came back together. There were those that wanted to focus entirely on this verse and ignore the rest of the message of the Bible. There were those that just wanted to say, look, slavery does not represent the heart and character and the timeless will of God. God said it. I believe it. That settles it. What in the world are we going to do with this? This is a mess, isn't it? This is a mess. Is everybody going to have to go to seminary to figure out how to read the Bible? Why no? Why no? Not at all. Let's focus on Romans. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under... Something else is about to happen now. The window shade's being lifted up. We're not under the law, but under grace. My friends, what are we to do? If you don't remember anything else, remember this. Ultimately, Jesus is the standard by which all Scripture is measured. Does that make sense to you? Jesus is the standard by which all Scripture is measured. Did Jesus talk about enslaving people? No, Jesus talked about freeing people. Hold on to that tight. The reason for that is Jesus is the clearest revelation we have about the nature, the character, and the will of God. That's the clearest idea that we have in Jesus' life and teachings about the character of God. How God really is. Hold on to that. Now you're getting ready to say, oh, wait a minute. You got it wrong, preacher. But see, I read the Bible. That's where I got it on you. And I can pull out verses like this. This is at the end of Matthew. Jesus is ready to ascend to heaven. And he says, what? All what? All what again? Who is the ultimate authority by which all Scripture is measured? Jesus. Jesus. Well, I knew there'd be a bunch of you that wouldn't be convinced. So I got another verse. This is really the most explosive verse in the entire Bible. And the Word became and we have seen His glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and... Who is the ultimate authority? Jesus is the ultimate authority. Can we establish that? This is what he said in Matthew 22. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Who said that? The words of Jesus. So now we're beginning to see something take shape here about how to handle the Bible. Jesus is all authority. Jesus is the Word made flesh. And Jesus tells us, first and foremost, the greatest and second commandment is to love God and to love. So everything that we read is read through that lens. Right? I can see you're unconvinced. But that's all right, because there's going to be homework. This is the lens by which everything is measured. Now, what shall we say? See all these jars? That represents all the people of the world trying to figure out this thing called the Bible. So here's a few clues. The Bible is large, and it really is. It's large and complex. No one can know it all. It has to be read daily, or you soon lose it. And you will wrestle with it, with what it has to say. Count on it. It's best studied in a group of people. Bible studies held in people's homes is one of the number one ways that churches are planted. That's one of the number one ways that churches are planted, is Bible studies held in people's homes. Why is it necessary to study the Bible in a group? Because it helps. Watch this. What's this? What is that? Is that a fencing mask, Marge? It's a colander. And it's in a group that our personal bias gets filtered out. Because quite